Привет, мои товарищи! I'm Comrade Vadim, and you're watching Ranking Every Assassin's Marksmanship. Today we're looking at the dramatic and historically unprecedented attempted assassination on President Andrew Jackson by Richard Lawrence. We'll uncover the details of both of these men, dive into the fascinating circumstances of this attempted assassination, and then of course at the end we'll go out to the range and figure out just how easy or difficult this shot may have been for Richard Lawrence. Let's dive in. Andrew Jackson was born March 15, 1767, between the current-day border of North and South Carolina, in a turbulent colonial America inching towards revolution. He was the youngest of three children born to Andrew Jackson Sr. and Elizabeth Hutchinson. However, he was the only one born in America because his parents immigrated to America about 2 years before he was born, when his older brothers were 2 and 1 years old. Unfortunately, his father passed away before he was born. During the Revolutionary War, Jackson joined the war as a courier at only 13 years old. During the war, he experienced deep trauma for a boy that young. A year before he joined, his oldest brother died in the Battle of Stono Ferry, and about a year after he joined, both him and his remaining brother were captured by the British as prisoners and put into POW camps. They were eventually freed, though, during a prisoner exchange. Sadly, his brother died 2 days after being free due to smallpox. After nursing her only son back to health, Jackson's mother volunteered to help other POWs on a British POW ship, where she eventually contracted cholera and died. Jackson was now only 14 years old, with no parents, no brothers, and a hatred for the British. Despite limited formal education, Jackson eventually studied law and became a very successful frontier lawyer and judge in Tennessee. After this, his rise in politics was steady. Jackson became a member of the Democratic Republic Party, and then after Tennessee officially became a state in 1796, he was elected to be a U.S. representative for the new state, and then briefly served as U.S. Senator before resigning to become a judge for the Tennessee Superior Court. He also served as Major General in the Tennessee Militia after a very contested race, which almost ended in a duel, and we'll see some more of these duels later on. After his term as judge, he went back to a very quiet life as a planter on his 1,000-acre farm, the Hermitage. In his free time, he really enjoyed horse racing, and it was at one of these horse races that him and Charles Dickinson had a dispute over some payments, which resulted in a duel. But this time, the duel would actually happen. As the two lined up, Dickinson got the first shot off, hitting Jackson right in the chest, but it was quickly followed by a report from Jackson, which instantly killed Dickinson. Jackson's national fame skyrocketed after the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, where his tactical brilliance led to a decisive victory over the British. His nickname Old Hickory captured his resilience and toughness, something that made him both revered and feared. Finally, in 1824, Andrew Jackson ran for President of the United States. Though he received the plurality of both popular and electoral votes, in the end a contingent election would be held where he would lose to John Quincy Adams. However, in 1828, Jackson was elected the 7th President of the United States, bringing popularism and robust executive authority into the White House. His presidency was marked with controversial policies such as the Indian Removal Act, which led to the infamous Trail of Tears, the war on the Second Bank of the United States, and the advocacy for the common man against the privileged elite. By 1835, Jackson had polarized America. His fierce leadership had created intense loyalty among his supporters, but also created intense hatred from his political adversaries, as well as the common man who had been affected by those aggressive policies. It was this polarized climate that set the stage for an unprecedented event. Richard Lawrence was born around 1800 in England, but immigrated to the United States with his family to Virginia. Little is known about Lawrence's early life. However, we do know that by adulthood, he had settled into a quiet existence as a house painter around the Washington, D.C. area. Initially, Lawrence seems unremarkable. Friends and family described him as polite and reserved. However, in November of 1832, Lawrence started exhibiting signs of severe mental illness, possibly caused by the chemicals within the house paints of the time. Lawrence started to believe that he was King Richard III of England, convinced that President Andrew Jackson's decisions were personally impeding him from claiming his supposed rightful inheritance. And this inheritance would allow him to buy back his ships and sail back to England to return to his normal life, apparently. His delusions steadily grew more severe and dangerous, influenced heavily on the extreme political rhetoric that was so prevalent during Jackson's controversial presidency. Lawrence's obsessions deepened around 1834, particularly focused on Jackson's destruction of the National Bank. Believing Jackson's policies prevented him from receiving funds from England, Lawrence felt justified, possibly even destined, to eliminate Jackson, believing that Vice President Martin Van Buren would settle his debts. Neighbors and acquaintances noted his increasingly erratic behavior, including nonsensical outbursts and aggressive proclamations against the president. Despite these disturbing behaviors, Lawrence's mental decline was largely dismissed or ignored by those around him. No one realized just how far these obsessions would drive him, nor the historic act he was quietly preparing. President Andrew Jackson is attending the funeral of South Carolina Congressman Warren Davis at the U.S. Capitol building. As the ceremony concluded, the mourners exited the building. Jackson, leaning on his cane, stepped outside onto the east portico, surrounded by his entourage of congressmen and cabinet members. Richard Lawrence had strategically placed himself amongst the crowd, nervously gripping two small single-shot Derringers hidden beneath his coat. As Jackson drew near, Lawrence stepped forward, raised the pistol up to the president's chest, and squeezed the trigger. The crowd gasped, yet only the click of a hammer echoed. The pistol had misfired. Jackson, startled and enraged, raised his cane to attack the attacker. Lawrence, acting quickly to not get whacked by Jackson, reached into his coat pocket and grabbed a second Derringer and raised it towards the president's chest once again. Amazingly, this pistol also misfired, failing to discharge its deadly projectile. Jackson, now in a furious rage, lunged forward and began beating Lawrence with his cane. The 67-year-old president had to be physically removed and restrained by his aides while the crowd tackled and subdued Lawrence. The stunned crowd watched in disbelief, realizing how narrowly America had escaped from losing a sitting president to an assassin's hand, the first such event on any sitting president of the United States. Alright, now for the fun part, the gun. Or, in this case, guns. For this assassination attempt, Richard Lawrence used two small, single-shot Derringer-like pistols. I say Derringer-like because we don't know exactly what gun he had. However, Derringers first were introduced in 1825. This event took place in 1835, so it very well could be a Derringer. We just don't know for sure, so I'm not going to say it's a Derringer. While these aren't the exact model, I do have a couple Derringers here that will fit the bill for today's recreation. These are actually Philadelphia Derringers, the same type that John Wilkes Booth will use to assassinate President Abraham Lincoln about 30 years after this event. Derringers like these became very popular in the early to mid 19th century for their compact size and ease of concealability. Typically, they'd be chambered in a very small caliber, such as .41 caliber or below, and they were really only effective at extremely short ranges. These are notoriously simple firearms. They are single action, so you will go manually cock the hammer there, and then when you're ready, you'll go pull the trigger there to drop the hammer. I can tell you that they are incredibly concealable, however they do feel quite delicate compared to some handguns of today, but that's kind of to be expected. You also have some very crude front sight posts here, so outside of extremely close ranges, it would be very difficult to aim with these. Using these is actually very simple. You'd pull your hammer back, you'd put your percussion cap right there, you'd carry it around in this half-cocked position for safety reasons, then when you're ready to use it, you would go to the full-cocked position, and then the trigger will move this hammer, drop it to interact with the percussion cap, it would set off the explosion, and boom, Bob's your uncle. You would have to be very careful though, because moisture can greatly affect these guns. Any amount of moisture built up in the barrel, the percussion cap, or any other critical part of the gun could cause a misfire. So typically, if you were to own one of these and want to carry it around for the day, What you would do is you'd load up a few percussion caps first thing in the morning, you'd fire them off, clear out any of the moisture within the barrel or other critical components, and then you'd load up your actual round for the day, putting the bullet in the barrel, putting a real percussion cap, setting it in that half-cock position, and going out for the day. Of course, this process doesn't stop that while carrying it, more moisture could build up and cause a misfire. So when you're in extremely damp conditions, that is a very large concern for the user. And that is exactly what happened to Richard Lawrence on that day in 1835, twice. So now let's break down the shot again, that way we are fully prepared to recreate it at the range. On that damp January day, Richard Lawrence positioned himself amongst the crowd near a pillar of the Capitol building. As President Jackson was leaving the funeral and walking past where Richard Lawrence was hiding, Lawrence stepped out from the crowd, stepped towards the president, and closed the gap to 3 to 4 feet at most, according to witnesses. He would have been positioned directly in front of the president without many guards in the way, as there wasn't much of a need for substantial security detail yet at that time. Lawrence aimed the first Derringer right at Jackson's chest and pulled the trigger, but it's suspected that the dampness from the day caused the black powder charge to misfire. Jackson, realizing what had just happened, started walking towards Lawrence with his cane, prepared to beat him over the head, but Lawrence, acting quickly to avoid being beaten by the old president's cane, pulled out a second Derringer, aimed it once again at the president's chest, and it once again misfired, likely due to the dampness of the day. It was only then that Jackson reached Lawrence and began beating him with his cane. Immediately after this event, Lawrence was quickly arrested and brought to trial. Now, a little fun fact about this trial is that the prosecuting attorney for this case was Francis Scott Key, who had actually written the Star-Spangled Banner about 20 years prior to this event. Given Lawrence's obvious mental instability, the trial quickly concluded that he was insane and unable to stand for regular prosecution. Lawrence spent the rest of his life institutionalized, mostly forgotten until his death in 1861. President Jackson, however, escaped the situation relatively unscathed physically, but was profoundly impacted emotionally and politically. He publicly accused his political adversaries of orchestrating the attack, most notably the Whig Party, which only deepened existing partisan tensions. His former vice president, John Calhoun, was the main target of these attacks. However, Mississippi Senator George Poindexter was also a target of these attacks, and even lost his seat in Congress because of it. The bizarre circumstances around this event led to many conspiracy theories. Some speculated that the pistols were intentionally sabotaged to misfire, while others claimed that Jackson had divine intervention that saved him. However, authorities did take the Derringers in for testing, and they found that they actually operate just fine under normal dry conditions, strengthening the argument that Lawrence got extremely unlucky with the damp conditions of the day. This event's legacy has endured through the ages as the first attempted assassination of a US president. It influenced how presidential security is handled, paving the way for more formal means to protect the president, which eventually would become the Secret Service. But we still have one question to answer. How good of a marksman was Richard Lawrence? Was Richard Lawrence possibly the best marksman of all time, but the failure of his firearms have hidden that fact from us for all these years? Let's go to the range and we'll be able to answer that question. Let's go.
Hello, guys!
Today we are out at the range to recreate the attempted assassination of President Andrew Jackson. Thank you very much to past Comrade Vadim once again for the great story. Today we have two Derringers, just as Richard Lawrence did when he attempted to kill President Andrew Jackson. So as we just heard, as President Andrew Jackson was coming up through the rotunda, Richard Lawrence came up and attempted to shoot him once. It failed to go off, and he pulled out a second Derringer and attempted again. And it again failed, making him one of the worst assassins in history. It's not going to be hard to guess what rank he gets at the end of this video. Let's go recreate it. Before we get into the recreation though, I want to make sure I'm fully warmed up for today's shooting. So let's give it some tries here. Oh, that was a good one. Another good one. So the smart ones amongst you may have realized that these are fake. I don't have the budget for real Derringers, of course, especially not 2 of them. So it works out in my favor because Richard Lawrence never even gets a shot off. So props with moving hammers works just perfectly fine for this video. So we have President Andrew Jackson here. I'm going to be just a couple steps away, and we're going to fire once, realize we misfired, pull out a second, and fire again, only to realize I once again misfired. I don't think I need to practice the shots here, but we're still going to give it the scientific method of 3 attempts. Let's see how we do. Alright, let's give it a try. President's just a couple paces away. Let me give it my best shot. Oh no. It's a good thing I have another. Oh. Alright, that felt pretty accurate. I feel like those were some pretty good shots, but let's try again. Let's try again. I forgot to show you the target. As you can see, yeah, okay. Attempt 2. Okay, once again. Okay. All right, final attempt. Let's see if Richard Lawrence can make up for these failed attempts. I think I have a second. No luck. No luck at all. President Andrew Jackson looks perfectly fine. He'll complete his presidency unscathed. And Richard Lawrence, not so much. As we just heard, Richard Lawrence won't be so lucky as President Andrew Jackson here. So based on all of this, all the factors that we can't account for, such as I've heard stories that President Andrew Jackson started whacking him with his cane and other factors like that, at the end of the day, Richard Lawrence didn't get a single shot off, and that puts him in the F category. Thanks for watching the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ranking Every Assassin's Marksmanship. If you did, make sure to check out my channel and check out the other episodes of this series, both shorts and long-form breakdowns. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Tell me, was President Jackson the luckiest guy in history, or was Richard Lawrence just the unluckiest assassin of all time? Until next time, guys, do svidaniya.